This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 61st edition of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We have a special guest today, baseball legend Jim Abbott. Before I go further with this interview, I want to recognize my engineer today, James Gerd. And by the way, Jim, I just learned this a few minutes ago. James in elementary school wrote a report about you. He was supposed to report on a figure that inspired him. He did it on you. So that we have I want to share that with you. I just learned that a couple minutes ago.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I'm honored. Thank you very much.
And James is also the host of the After Dark show at Rainier Avenue Radio.world. We have a sports department here, great shows hosted by Rick Dupree, Granville Entersman, Renault Laurent, Masvita Marari. We also have some wonderful, I don't want to forget anybody in our sports department, Pat McCarthy, Mark Bryant. We also have some great news shows and talk shows and music shows and lifestyle shows, Rainier Avenue Radio.world. A lot of great things are going on here. My Sports and Stuff show has been on now for over 2 years, having a lot of fun. I practice law, and I'm having fun doing this show a couple times a month. My interviews are on my website, plslawoffices.com. A bunch are on Mixcloud. We're going to get some more archived soon. Well, Jim, I'm going to give you a little more of an introduction. You don't need a long introduction, but I like to do this with my guests. Jim Abbott achieved major success as a major league player despite having been born without a right hand. Very inspirational story. Jim played 10 seasons for 5 major league teams. He was a star pitcher at the University of Michigan. Once pitched a no-hitter for the Yankees in 93. Finished third in the Cy Young Award in 1991. I mean, the list goes on and on of Jim's accomplishments. Member of the 88 U.S. Olympic team. He's now a motivational speaker. He does some work with the U.S. Department of Labor in enhancing businesses to work more with disabled people. Jim wrote an autobiography, which I look forward to reading, Imperfect and Improbable Life. There was a documentary on Jim that came out on Fox in 2018. I can go on, but Jim, thank you so much for coming on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. It was very nice to say hello to you at the Fred Hutch lunch in Seattle this year, too.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Paul. It was a pleasure to meet you there, and I really think the Fred Hutchinson Award and ceremony there was one of the highlights of my whole year. I had so much fun up there at that event, and it was fun to be at the ballpark and fun to play catch with Eddie Vedder. A dream come true for me, and to do, and try to help out with such a wonderful research center and a wonderful place. So great to talk to you. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on, Jim. And, you just kind of answered my first question. The first question I had was for you to get your take on the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center based here in Seattle, and it's one of my favorite causes, and it was just great to see you as the keynote speaker, and I know many people in attendance enjoyed that. It was fun to watch you play catch with Eddie Vedder.
Well, when they first broached the idea that maybe it would be him to come up and play catch, I was very touched that he would be there, and obviously the Hutchinson Center means a lot to him. I guess he comes every single year, and so it just worked out great. It was I was up there for a couple of days, had a chance to spend some time with the brilliant people over there who are working hard to eradicate cancer and provide hope for so many people, and it was just it was so inspiring to be around people who find so much meaning in their work and very serious, dedicated people, and I just really, really was inspired by my trip up there, and like I said, it's one of the real highlights of 2019 for me.
Love it. No, you gave a great speech. Well, Jim, you've probably gotten this question many times. I'm still going to ask you this question, and why don't you tell us a little bit how you got the baseball bug as a kid growing up, and when did you kind of realize you could take baseball to the highest level?
Well, it was a step-by-step process, to be honest. I loved all sports. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, which is famous for both good and bad things. Right. Famous for being tough, famous for having its challenges, but also famous for having a lot of great athletes. And so I grew up in that environment, and I grew up wanting to be a part of things and wanting to fit in and wanting to play with my friends and who were athletes and who loved sports. And so baseball called to me in those ways just because I was kind of good at it. I always had a good arm. I could throw, and if I could figure out a way of switching the glove on and off of my left hand, I could participate and I could succeed. And that was really important for me as a kid who felt a little bit on the outside looking in.
It's just an amazing story. This is Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on RainierAvenueRadio.world with baseball legend Jim Abbott. Jim, it's just amazing how you were able to have a great career playing with one hand. And I want to ask you about something else. And I want to know about what other challenges in life have you overcame? For example, was learning to drive hard for you? Other than baseball, can you share with us some other challenges in your life that people may not know about that you've been able to overcome and do well with?
That's an interesting question, Paul. Not many people have ever asked that. And there are things, there are definitely things that have been challenging for me. I can't. But I was born this way, so it's what I knew. It's how I grew up, and there was no other, model than just sort of being creative and finding different ways of doing things. Whether it was tying shoes or buttoning a shirt, tying a tie. All those day-to-day things, provide their own challenge. But I believe that in almost every instance that there is a way, there's a different way of doing it. It may take a little more time, but there always seems to be a way that you can do things and you can figure it out. I've never learned the piano. I've never learned the guitar. Musical instruments I haven't taken on. But I'm sure that there are kids out there, I guarantee you, who play piano one-handed or
Sure.
play the guitar. I know guitar for sure because I've heard of kids and have met artists who do it. So, the old cliche, where there's a will, there's a way, and I've just seen it too many times, whether it's me or somebody else around the country with a similar challenge. There always seems to be a way to get things done.
You've learned to kind of max things out. It seems like I'm kind of dealing with the situation, right?
Absolutely, and I think that comes from the spirit of my hometown and the teachers and the coaches and friends that I was surrounded with. And it's funny that you mentioned driving. I remember in my driver's education class, they must have done some thought before I showed up, because I got there and in Flint, Michigan, it was pretty cool. It was a Buick town. It's where they made Buick. So Buick used to donate these brand new cool sedans that you would drive around in for drivers training. It was part of the high school curriculum. And for the car that I was assigned to, it had like this driver's knob on the steering wheel that you could use one hand. And I guess it was adaptive in some ways. And I started doing some pretty creative turns on the course with that thing, and they took it off and said, "You're just fine the way you are." So it was, it was just a wonderful community that I was surrounded with, and they were always looking for ways to help and for ways for me to do things, and I look back on that. It just your question reminded me of that experience.
Yeah, no, I do want to learn a little bit more about how you've addressed some other challenges in your life, and I think myself and my listeners learn a little bit more. Well, Jim, you were part of that great 1988 U.S. Olympic team. I remember I'm a little younger than you, but I remember that team a little bit. Why is it called an unofficial gold medal, that 88 team you were on?
Well, it was a demonstration sport at that point. It wasn't yet. They were just trying it out at the Olympics, the 84 team and the 88 teams. It was officially listed as a demonstration sport. So, I guess it was an unofficial. I believe in 92 it became an official sport. In the 96, and obviously they haven't had it as an Olympic sport for the past couple of years, but looks like it might be coming back. It looks like softball might be coming back as an Olympic sport, and really heartened to see that. I think that'll be fantastic for both the sports and for the Olympics. That
must be a highlight of your baseball career, participating in the 88 Olympic Games in Seoul, huh?
It was absolutely unbelievable. We had some fantastic players. Some players who would be very familiar with people up in the upper Northwest. Scott Service was our catcher on that team. Tino Martinez was our first baseman. And, it was the best team I ever played for. It truly was, and I don't mean that just in talent, but in the mission and the focus that team had. Nobody cared all that much of what their role was on the team. They just wanted to be on the team at all and wanted to contribute in any way that they could. And so it just made for an unbelievably great experience. We were all young in our, early 20s and, a lot of life in front of us. And it was just the perfect time to go out there and play all around the world and play against, just tremendous baseball teams from Japan and Cuba and all over the world. And I didn't play in the minor leagues at all in the beginning of my career, but that experience sure was a great foundation for preparing for professionals.
I just love it, Jim. I wanted to get a little Olympic talk in with you for a minute or two, and you had some great insights. Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio.world with Major League Pitching great Jim Abbott. Jim, when I'm very familiar with your career. I used to watch you play in Seattle for years, and like millions of baseball fans, I'm familiar with your career. But one thing I didn't realize really, Jim, until I was doing a little pre-show research, is that you were able to hit the ball in several major league games. Can you tell us for a minute how you're able to hit a baseball with one hand?
Well, whether or not I hit the ball or not is debatable. I have 2 hits in my major league career, and we don't need to get into the average. But, it's really I grabbed the bat, with 2 hands. I did try to incorporate. I have part of my right hand, so I'm fortunate in that regard. I was able to incorporate, both sides of my body pretty well in terms of whether it was the pitching motion or it was the swinging of a bat or swinging of a golf club. So I do have that. And so I could get the bat started. I could get the bat kind of going through the zone, and the major league pitching is just a whole different deal. It's hard to describe. Basically, I didn't have many at bats between high school and then the major leagues, so the jump was incredible when I got up there and got into the major league batting box. But even fairly average major league pitching is astoundingly hard to hit. It's
Absolutely.
It's amazing how quickly you have to react and how quickly you have to pick that ball up, and then the thought of the ball breaking or the thought of a change of speeds. It's a ridiculously difficult thing to do.
It's just amazing you're able to get a couple of hits, and that's a neat part of your career, Jim. Jim, okay, this is something I think you probably have a very unique perspective on. What do you think about baseball purists who don't believe in the DH rule?
I grew up in the American League. I grew up rooting for the Detroit Tigers as a kid, and then the DH goes back as far as I can remember. So I don't think the game is hindered by having a designated hitter. I think it's a more exciting game. I think getting one more skilled player out there it's I don't mind it at all. I mean, seeing a pitcher come up there, it always seemed a little bit anticlimactic. Yeah, there's a few who hit pretty decently, but
sure.
But it certainly has a strategy. I get that, but pitching around people just to get to the pitcher and having that somewhat guaranteed out at the end of the lineup, I don't think that makes the game any better. I think the DH, it's no easier for a pitcher, that's for sure, but I don't think it hinders the game in any way. I'm not one of those purists in that regard. Gotcha.
I have the American League guy myself growing up in Seattle, but I just want to kind of get your perspective on that because I think you come from a very unique perspective on that whole issue. Paul Schneiderman, again, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with baseball great Jim Abbott. I got James Gerd as our engineer today. James one time wrote a paper on my guest, Jim Abbott. I just love it. Jim, you had some amazing individual accomplishments. You finished third in the Cy Young Award, as I mentioned in the introduction, in 91. You threw a no-hitter in 93. What's a team accomplishment you really liked in your Major League Baseball career?
Well, that the Olympic gold medal was the pinnacle of my team achievements, and that's great. That's fantastic. I will never ever regret think anything differently. I just think that was an amazing accomplishment with a group of guys who love each other. Unfortunately, in my major league career, and somewhat because of the Seattle Mariners, one of the best teams I played on in 1995, we ended up in a tie, a virtual tie, for the division pennant, and went up to Seattle and faced Randy Johnson in the Kingdome and lost a heartbreaking playoff game to them and didn't make the playoffs. And what an atmosphere that was. I'll never forget the level of noise and excitement in the Kingdome, and it felt like a playoff game. It maybe even heightened even more because it was do or die. That was just incredible feeling, and we lost, unfortunately. Mark Langston battled and Randy battled, and we came up on the short end of it, but I'll always remember that game for the intensity, and I'll never forget after we lost, the Mariner fans jumping on the field, literally jumping over the dugout and landing on the field and running around, and just feeling the greatest of highs, and while we were feeling the greatest of lows, sitting there in the dugout watching the celebration happen.
Remember that game well. Your interviewer was in attendance at that game in the old Kingdome, and remember it very well. It was an exciting, tie-breaking game for sure, Jim. And it's interesting to hear your perspective as a member of the California Angels that day. Jim, can you mention one or two Major League Baseball players, whether they're existing players, deceased players, retired players, who've had some different types of challenges where you've really admired them? Maybe one or two that have stand out. Could be a physical challenge, a mental health challenge. Can you mention one or two players who've had challenges that you've always admired?
Well, one of my heroes, and this isn't really a challenge, when they were playing, but I think my favorite player was Lou Gehrig, for the class and the way that he went about playing the game, and the way he handled, the diagnosis of ALS and all that he did, and in that grace of how he did that, I just marvel at the fact that he was in his late 30s. You see those films, and you think, gosh, this guy was older, but he wasn't. He was a young man when he came down with that disease, and so I think all baseball players admire Lou Gehrig and what he battled against. I think back to Jim Eisenreich, who was a great player of my generation, who battled a Tourette's syndrome, and it was able to overcome that and be just a tremendous baseball player for the Kansas City Royals. And honestly, I don't mean to deflect the question, but every single player who you see play the game of baseball is dealing with something, and that's one thing you discover. In a major league clubhouse, it's the beauty of the game, really. I think because people come from so many different backgrounds,
sure,
so many different places around the world. Some from extreme poverty, and some from great, privilege. Some come from the southern part of the United States. Some come from the west and the northern parts, and but everybody's dealing with something. Whether it was an overbearing parent or an injury somewhere along the way, or a skeptical childhood. I would bet you any person you ever interview who played in the major leagues will tell you a fairly interesting story about what they overcame to get there, and that's what I miss about a major league clubhouse, and that's what inspires me when I talk to young players, is that you can contribute to a baseball team in so many different ways. You know, it really is a very inclusive game when you take a deep look at it. And I think the Houston Astros and their lineup would attest to that. You know, so it's a game for everybody, and everybody has a little something that they've overcome. But there's room for everybody to make their contribution.
Well, I really enjoyed your answer to that question, Jim. You mentioned two players, including Lou Gehrig, who certainly dealt with some challenges, but I really enjoy the way and appreciate the way you brought up that almost every Major League player has something that they've dealt with, that there's some challenge. And I really think I learned a lot just hearing from you, hearing from your answers. I think my listeners did too, to your answer to that question, that everybody has a life story, don't they?
They truly do. I mean, you know, it's funny. I think there's a misconception out there that it was some smooth road, you know, for guys who made it. And you know, even Ken Griffey Jr., who I think was as talented a baseball player as I ever saw, you know, from the very beginning, you know, when the moment he stepped on a field. And it, you know, to the rest of us looking in, you know, you would think, boy, that was just a road paved, you know, just for him,
right,
to get there and to succeed. And I would bet you, you know, I don't know him well, but I would bet you, you know, he could tell a different story. You know, he could tell a story of expectations and pressure and you know, of I don't know, I would be speculating, but you know, the point is that each and every player who goes to bat every night is a human, and that's obvious, of course, but I sometimes get frustrated with the modern game because it has become so analytical, and which is fine. You know, everyone uses information to gain an edge and to get better, but there are real people behind these statistics, and there's real, genuine effort being made out there. And I think when it's constantly broke down to just numbers, that humanness of the game and that effort, you know, we lose touch with that just a little bit.
Way beyond sabermetrics. If you're just tuning in, this is Paul Schneiderman, host of Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio with baseball great Jim Abbott, just having a great conversation. Well, Jim, I want to bring up a sports figure, and maybe, at least I have, and I'm not claiming to be the super fan, but an athlete that I've sort of overlapped you with a little bit is the golfer Casey Martin, a golfer who golfed with a disability. Do you know Casey Martin at all, Jim? And do you relate to him at all and what Casey went through in his career?
I had a chance to meet Casey Martin one time, just coincidentally. I happened to be up in Oregon, and it was when he was coaching the Oregon golf team, and I had a chance to say hi. I did. You know, at the time, during when I was playing, you know, his story was very prominent, and the idea of riding in a golf cart was frowned upon by the purist in the pro game, and I took Casey's side on it.
I did too.
I felt like the accommodation of riding in a cart for someone who can compete and couldn't compete otherwise was fair enough, and there was some gray area to it. I mean, it was hard for anybody, I think, to say, someone who's walking a golf course is going to, of course, be more tired and fatigued than Casey would be riding in a golf cart. I was never persuaded of that argument, but I also. And this doesn't have anything to do with a rational, you know, as a lawyer argument. I just know now how many people out there can be inspired by those types of stories, and I've seen it firsthand. I've met, I don't know how many kids and families who've been through similar circumstances as mine, and I know a story like Casey's provided great hope and inspiration for a lot of people out there. So anytime there is an opportunity for a story like that to be told, I'm all for it. And it may not make perfect logical sense, but I think the world is a better place, when we have the idea that everybody can participate.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I'm a staunch believer in disability rights, and I think you and Casey are two athletes of our generation that have done a lot to inspire a lot of people. Jim, we got just a couple minutes left. I got time for two more questions, and I just want to get your kind of quick 1-minute take on the Washington Nationals 2018 season. Pretty inspirational, huh?
Yeah, amazing. Think of where they were in May and the talk of everything, and even losing Bryce Harper in the beginning of the season, and to come back and win 4 games on the road in the World Series to beat the Dodgers at home in extra innings. Great Howie Kendrick, who I'm a big fan of. They were a wonderful story. I thought it was one of the best World Series I've watched in a while.
Loved it. No, I think it kind of got some more casual fans back into baseball again a little bit. Well, Jim, we're about to wrap it up. We got maybe a minute or two left, James, I think. About a minute left. What does the future hold for Jim Abbott?
Well, I'm very excited about the future. I live down in Southern California. I've got 2 daughters who are off at school, so I've got a little more time these days. I'm working on my golf game, trying to figure that whole thing out, and I'm just going to continue doing the things that I was able to do off the field while I played, and now, I get a chance to speak. I get a chance to meet a lot of wonderful people. I get a chance to go around the country and see cool places and meet cool people, and I'm very fortunate. I'm not officially in the game anymore, so to speak, but I sure benefit from the association, and I'm proud, very proud, to be a part of the baseball family.
Jim, just loved having you on Sports and Stuff on Rainier Avenue Radio. We're about to wrap it up now due to the 27-minute clock, but hold on for 1 second when this interview ends, and I really appreciate coming on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You too, Jim.